Hi, my name is Khleif, and I'm the host of the Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing podcast. And every week I interview multifamily rock stars, and we talk about how they've built incredible wealth for themselves and their families through multifamily properties. So hit the like and subscribe buttons to get notified every Monday when a new episode comes out. Let's get to it. Welcome to another edition of How to Build Lifetime Cash Flow Through Real Estate Investing. I'm Khleif, and I'm thrilled that you're here. Now, today, we've got a special guest. His name's Steve White, and Steve owns a company called RentPrep. And we are going to talk about tenant screening, which is, frankly, can be a very subjective topic because there's so many nuances and different situations that you'll encounter when you evaluate a tenant. So let's have some fun today. Steve, welcome to the show, brother.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, Rod. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. I know that, you've got a background in both commercial real estate assets and residential assets that you own. And, your company does tenant screening for landlords. And let's get right into the topic of tenant screening. Mm-hmm. And so, in my own experience, we've got primarily A and B assets. We do have one C asset, and I had to get involved with the management company as part of the screening process. I mean, back in the day, if somebody had bad credit, we'd get a triple deposit, and just try to beef up our protections. But with all the discrimination and housing laws that there are now, there's a lot of nuances. You have to be really, really careful. Yeah. But let's talk. What are some of your tips for tenant screening? And that's a real general question, but maybe you could just expand on that, and we'll start there, and we'll just go wherever it just takes us.
I'll tell you I own the company that does background checks long before I bought my first rental property. Partially out of fear, partially out of because I didn't want to, be the guy that does this for a living and ends up with a bad tenant. And so that was always in the back of my mind of, I can't screw this up. So I'll tell you probably the best tip that I've got that I learned myself, which is never be afraid to let the place sit vacant versus making a desperate decision. And I let my first rental property sit vacant for about 5 months. I know that in a lot of areas, maybe you can't do that. Certain municipalities now around the country have you got a screen in order, and you have to select the first qualified tenant. I'm lucky enough to live in an area where I could be picky and I can choose the best fit. And that's exactly what I did. And so, landlords often find themselves in trouble if they're selecting the least worst tenant. You have to have a good pool of applicants to be able to find who the best potential fit is going to be. So that'd be my first piece of advice. Is
let me circle back on something you just said. Are you telling me there's some blue states that you have to select someone if you get an applicant?
Yeah. Wow. Well, you have to create criteria. If somebody checks the box and meets the criteria, you have to select them in the order that they apply. So the first person that meets your criteria, they're it. You got to select them.
Is there a way to make it so that it's a little more subjective, so the criteria is such that really it's very difficult for anybody to make it?
That's a great point. I often tell landlords, make the criteria difficult because you want room to make decisions in there and to compromise and to make an exception, but you can't go the other way. You can't set the standard low and then go back to them and say, I got a weird feeling about this. So and if you're in one of those areas, set your criteria strict. Listen, if somebody passes it, great. But if not, you at least want a little bit of room there to be able to say, all right, we're going to make an exception for this, or I'm okay with that. So, yeah.
Because there is subjectivity to it. Yes. I mean, if I see somebody that's got, bad credit, but it's primarily medical bills versus somebody didn't pay their rent or, didn't pay something more significant, then you might have some leeway in particularly if you're having trouble finding, the right people. Okay.
I always say, the perfect formula for screening tenants, it's got to be 2 parts data, 1 part gut feeling. You can't discount that gut feeling. We've all had it. I'm sure other landlords out there and investors have had that moment where maybe you're doing a showing and things go okay. And then you walk the person out to the car and you see that they've got a cockpit of a driver's seat because the rest of the car is filled with junk. And immediately you start thinking, oh my gosh, this is a hoarder and this is how they're going to treat my rental unit. So that gut feeling has to be accounted for, and you have to leave room for that gut feeling decision at that time as well. So yeah, 2 parts data, 1 part gut feeling.
Let me expand on what you just said. And guys, if you may not have heard me talk about this. I talk about this when you're selecting partners, because this business is a team sport, and I've got a resource, the partnership questions you should ask before you get into a partnership. But one of the first things on that list is, how does it feel? What is your gut? Because your brain is so powerful that it will pick up on these micro nuances that you're not consciously aware of. There's a book about this called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, where like an example of it would be an art expert that can look at a painting and he knows it's a fake, but he doesn't know why he knows it's a fake. And that's an example. So you might get a feeling about somebody and you don't know why you feel funny, but don't discount it. Trust it. Every time I've ignored it, I've always regretted it, because your brain is so powerful. It'll pick up on things that you're not consciously aware of. So anyway, I really like that. So, when you're doing a background check on a resident, what are the sorts of things you want to look for, Steve?
Yeah. So I would say the first thing to remember is that tenant screening, selection, background checks, all of that, what you're doing in that exercise is you're judging somebody's character that you don't know. And so everything is on the table. And so a good example would be, we pull criminal records and we leave criminal records in there that might seem pretty benign, like no big deal. So if I've got somebody who maybe they didn't pay to have their vehicle inspected, or, in New York State, you've got to register your vehicle, I think every 2 years now. So, all right, not a huge deal. We've all been there, didn't get the vehicle inspected, forgot to renew the registration. But now if you see that 3 times, that's a red flag. That's something about their character that you've got to listen to. So, for most tenants, the most valuable asset that they manage is their vehicle. And if they're not able to take control and to manage that, then it's a pretty good indication likely that they're not going to take good care of the rental property as well. So I would say everything's on the table. Obviously, there are some things that, you certainly don't want to skip over, or you want to make sure that you're looking at, like evictions. There's probably no better tell than to see somebody's eviction history. According to our data, if you have 1 eviction, you are 3 times more likely to go through it again. That fear of the unknown is now gone. So I would say, if I'm prioritizing, I would say evictions at the top of the list.
Sure.
Credit is not as important as you would imagine it is. We survey 160,000 clients across the country that we're working with, and it's usually about 50-50 in terms of credit. Some landlords have that mindset of, well, if they had good credit, they'd probably buy a house, or, and then the other way, some landlords are looking at it from the point of view of, that's a great indicator of, can they pay their bills on time, or are they at least prioritizing their bills to make sure that the most important stuff is getting taken care of first. So I would say, there's certain things that you for sure want to look at, but the one thing that you want to make sure you're doing is you're looking at it as a whole, because you're judging that person's character, and anything can be used in that process.
So we're doing a credit check, we're doing a criminal check. And, there are things even on a criminal check that occasionally we will overlook and allow to get by, a possession charge that's 10 years old, or, something of that nature when the kid was 18, somebody was 18 or 19, or, something stupid, back when they were young. And obviously any violence of any kind is an absolute deal breaker for us. You feel the same way? Yeah,
I do. Sex offenders, obviously, too. Some landlords
of course.
Some landlords have a responsibility to, if they're in proximity to a playground or a school or something like that, or you got a multifamily, you got kids across the hallway, you want to make sure you know who's going in there.
Right.
So yeah, I would say, those things are certainly important. And I would also say it's important to not just Google people's names, because you made a point there, Rod, in saying, a possession charge from 10 years ago.
Right.
There are statutes of limitation and reportable limits in terms of how long you can use information. And so we see a lot of landlords that kind of do their own super sleuthing, which to some degree is okay. And I would even encourage it. But just be careful what information you're using in your decision to make sure that you're not using something that can't be used against that person. Everybody,
interesting. It could still be on the record. It hadn't been purged, but it's past a statute of limitations where you're not allowed to bring it up, I guess, is what you're saying.
Well, if you use a screening company that's FCRA compliant, like we are, we're pulling that stuff out so that we're not showing it to you. We don't want you to have that bias. If you can't see it, you can't see it. The danger is sometimes if you go to Google and you're looking at, an arrest report from your local town, you might see something on there, but it may be old and not reportable, and you technically can't use it. So as a landlord, you got to be careful for your basis of denial, because if you're denying somebody on something that you're technically not allowed to use that information, now that's a liability on the landlord.
So, let's talk, okay. So we're looking at credit. We're evaluating the type of blemishes they may have. We're looking at criminal. We're evaluating the type of blemishes they may have. How about credit score? Let's chat about that briefly.
Yeah. I don't put a whole lot of weight into scores because, if you've run a lot of credit and you've seen a lot of credit reports, that there are some factors, especially when it comes to scoring, that may not be, a good indicator of that person's financial health. So if they're young and they just don't have a lot of credit in their name, if they're old and they don't have a lot of credit in their name, we see that a lot of times too. Cash payers or people that just don't carry a lot of debt. They don't have a lot of trade lines. So, if you're looking to make a quick decision and hopefully an easy one, the credit score is not a bad place to look first. And there's a reason it's at the top of a credit report. But, I really feel like it's important to dig down into the whys, to find out, okay, maybe they have a bad credit score because there's not a lot of trade lines, or maybe they've got a bad credit score because of something that happened while they were going through a divorce. So I always say, background checks, credit reports, they're great conversation starters for investors and landlords who are making these decisions, because, it gives you an opportunity to say, hey, what happened here? Can you explain? And sometimes there's a reasonable explanation.
Yep. No, I like it. So let's now talk about, let's say someone passes all that screening, and they're in the property. What suggestions do you have for creating and nurturing the best possible relationship with that resident?
It's a great question. And it's my answer is somewhat controversial. Okay. I've heard both sides of it. So my personal opinion is, number one, you've got to have great communication, even if you have to set it and forget it. Set calendar reminders or automate some things as much as possible to have, 30 days after they move in. Hey, how's things going? Any light bulbs out? Things like that. 90 days, 90 days before a lease end date to say, hey, what are you doing? What's happening? Are we renewing here? Are you moving on? Those things are important. The controversial part is, I'm a firm believer that a rental property should be inspected at minimum every 6 months. Because think about is, in your own home as a homeowner, if you just let things go, they're going to fall apart. Even in the best of circumstances, you got a great tenant. But if nobody's sort of behind the wheel and watching out for what's going on, I just had a conversation today with a long-term client of ours, and they had gone 4 years without ever stepping foot in that property, and they were complaining about soft wood and some leaks under the sink, things like that. There's no reason that should go unchecked for 4 years. And so going into that property, A, there's a legitimate maintenance purpose to it and upkeep, but B, it's a lot easier to spot a problem in a 6-month cycle than it is to look back after 4 or 5 years. And now they've kicked holes in the wall. They flushed their socks down the toilet, or God forbid what else. And, it's too late in most of those situations. You can't turn back time. So get in the properties, make it formal, have an inspection sheet that you can kind of follow along, a checklist. But it's important to get in there and, change filters, look around, spot problems before they become out of control.
Yeah, no, what you said, as part of that process, good management companies will change the air filters. They'll change the batteries in a smoke detector. They'll look and make sure nothing is leaking. and just really go through it top to bottom. And that's sound advice. One other thing I'll add, as far as, creating the best resident experience and dealing with that on an asset we have right now is, there are a lot of ways to really make a resident feel wanted. Like calling them after every maintenance ticket, making sure they're happy with what happened, making sure they believe the job was done properly. Having tenant events, that to create culture. Like this one asset, we're having come into the office and meet the office staff. It's a new staff, and have coffee and donuts, and meet the on-site officer that lives there, and things of that nature. And then we're going to also have a end of the year pool party. So creating that culture. I've just decided this is a C asset. We're going to give turkeys to all the residents for Thanksgiving. Yeah. So really build a culture, because the most expensive expense that you have as a landlord is turnover. It's the 100%. Most costly expense you have. Yep. So, okay. Now,
and think about it from that point of view too, in the spectrum of owning these properties, on the worst end of things, you've got a bad, difficult to deal with tenant. On the best end of things, you've got a long-term tenant that things are going great. It is, you're 100% right. It is worth the effort and energy to put into nurturing that relationship and trying to ensure your investment.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say you've got a problem tenant. You do an inspection, you discover a hoarder, or or worse, you have drugs or, criminal activity. They're harassing neighbors. What are some thoughts you have around dealing with that?
Well, the first thing I'll point out to you, I don't know if you knew this or not, but I remember when it happened, it was absolutely crazy to me from my perspective on the industry, but hoarding is now considered a disability, and it's protected under the ADA.
Oh, good God, help us.
Right. So think about that from in your seat right now. What do you do? In the old days, the landlord, say, hey, listen, you got to go. This is crazy. Now there's this whole remedial action that you've got to take to help ensure that they're, that you're taking care of them. And
is this national? Is this federal, or is this statewide?
This is federal. This is according to the ADA. They are recognizing hoarding as a mental illness, and they have protections. So, you've got to.
Can you backdoor in with the condition of the unit with 100% with sanitation, danger?
Fire hazard, safety. Get the fire department. That's one of my first recommendations is get the fire department out there.
Wow.
And they start failing fire inspections. Now this is a different kind of an animal that you're dealing with.
Good.
So there are some ways around it, and I wouldn't even say ways around it, way to attack it head on, but not in the same way that landlords used to be able to attack it head on and just say, hey, you're out of here. This is crazy.
You used to be able to remove the front door, but you can't do that anymore. You used to be able to turn the utilities off. Now you can't do that anymore.
Correct.
Guys. Yeah, please don't ever make any stupid mistakes like that, or you'll be you'll be on the news that night and heading for a litigation.
Yes.
Okay. Well, listen, I is there anything that I haven't asked that I should have asked, about what it is you do in this whole process of tenant screening and tenant nurturing and tenant relationship? What did I miss? Anything?
Well, I don't think anything in that process. I feel like for landlords, one of the best things they can do is educate themselves and know. Mm-hmm. One of the things you mentioned, Rod, I think before we jumped on was you've got a mastermind group, and I love the idea of that. Because I know that investors and landlords learn peer to peer. They're learning from each other. They're talking about things that they're struggling with, and hopefully you learn from others' mistakes. And so especially when it comes to managing tenants, it's an important relationship. You don't want to get it wrong. You don't want to always react emotionally. My first rental property was the home that I raised my son in. It had notches on the door
where you
frame.
Measured him, huh?
Yeah, how tall he got, and so there was an emotional attachment to that. And I'll never forget the first time we drove by it. My wife was in the car, and she was just distraught over the fact that they ripped out the garden, and she was saying, "Did they know how many years it took to plant that English garden and to get it where we wanted it?" As a landlord, you've got to remove that emotional attachment and think about operating as a business. And so same thing with how you're managing tenants. If you're an employer, especially nowadays, it well. Retain versus retrain. Keep the people you got, nurture that relationship.
Yeah, no question. And ideally, don't let them know you're the owner if you can avoid it, because it's always better to have 1 degree of separation, so you can say, no, the powers to be don't allow that, and have that kind of a communication process. It's much safer to not let people know you're the owner. Okay. Well, listen, I appreciate you being on the show, brother. This has been educational and not a topic that we've covered on the show in any great depth. So, this was good. So, Steve, thanks for coming on, my friend.
Great. Yeah. Appreciate you having me on, Rod, anytime.
All right. Take care.
Rod, I know a lot of our listeners are wanting to take their multifamily investing business to the next level. Now, I know you've been hard at work helping our Warrior students do just that using our ACT methodology, which is awareness, close, and transform. Can you explain to the listeners how they can get our help?
You bet. Guys, we've been going nonstop for 3 years, building an amazing community of like-minded people. And our coaching students, which we call our Warriors, have had extraordinary results. They've purchased thousands and thousands of units. And last year, we did over 1,000 units with our students. And we're looking to grow this group and take it to the next level. We're looking for people who want to follow a proven framework that's really step by step, and then leverage our systems and network to raise equity, to find and close deals, and to build partnerships nationwide. Now, our Warrior community is finding success in any market cycle. So if you're interested in finding out more about how you can become more of our incredible network and take advantage of the incredible opportunities that are coming very soon, apply to work with us at mentorwithrod.com or text CRUSH to 72345, and we'll set up a call so you can check us out and we can check you out. That's mentorwithrod.com or text CRUSH to 72345.